Hello, welcome to the Indie Review Show.
Yeah.
How's it
Welcome.
going, Josh?
All right. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm excited about today. It'll be an interesting one.
Me too. It's another one of a book I have not read, which I'm excited about. Usually, for those who are a little new to the show or anything like that, like half the game of the show, the gamifying of it is, like basically trying to coax the person, the co-host who hasn't read the book to read the book. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this turns out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I am a little curious about this one because I don't know if it's your style. So we'll see. We'll see at the end of it if I can convince you or not.
Hmm.
Okay, let's do our intro. I'm Cory Kerr,
And I am Joshua Kemble.
and this is the Indie Review Show.
And this is the series where we review the best of indie comics and other media like movies, TV, cartoons, books, and did we mention comics? The idea is that we're pulling back the curtains on our inspirations.
Josh and I have been professional illustrators, cartoonists, animators, graphic designers, and we've both taught at the college level. And we're getting into the stuff that inspires us.
Yes.
Real quick before we get started, you can check my stuff out at corykerr.com. It's CORYKERR.com. And if you want to see some of the animations and comics and illustrations and stuff that all these weird books that I bring up inspired me to make, then you can go to corykerr.com/online. And Josh, where can we find your stuff?
I love it. So in general, you can find my stuff at joshuakemble.com, but you can also join the many people, not enough, but hopefully, hopefully soon to be many, who have read and enjoyed my autobiographical graphic novel called Two Stories, Book One, which is a confessional graphic memoir that grapples with questions of faith, mental illness, depravity, and ultimately redemption in a fallen world. It's right up the alley of people who are interested in independent comics and independent creators. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And having read that book, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's pretty good stuff. Are you all set?
I am all set.
All right, here we go. So what have you brought us today, Cory?
So
Oh, and I do want to preface this too. There may be times during this where I have to mute because I get massively bad allergies this season. So rather than have you guys hear that, know that there might be some moments of silence.
that is okay. I'll try to talk enough for the both of us. So
I love it.
There won't be moments of silence. Okay, so yeah, today I'm presenting East of West. I actually liked this so much that I've purchased it twice. So I have it both in printed form, and Humble Bundle did a deal a little while ago where you can get like all 45 issues, and so I own digital copies of all 45 issues. So I'm going to present it today digitally, but real quick, I want to go through who made it. So Jonathan Hickman is the writer, and if you've read any Hickman stuff, this is pretty solid Hickman. It's kind of strange and out there, a little genre bending, a little meandering in there's almost no exposition. And Nick Dragotta is the artist, and he does a phenomenal job. I believe he's doing pencils and inks. And just, I mean, the character design and the emotion, the acting, the blocking, and the composition, just super top notch. Frank Martin brings the colors and is actually one of the few times when I would say that the color design is also part of the character design. And you'll kind of see what I mean by that. And then my favorite letterer, Russ Wooten, is on this one. He's the guy that I was mentioning before, where it was like, I'll do stuff, and then I was like, oh man, I really like this, and then I really like this, and then I also really like this, and I realized it was all the same letterer.
Yeah.
That's Russ Wooten.
Love it.
So anyway, so that's who's on this book. And one of the things that I love about the design of this book is that because it's indie, they leave space for things, and so they have these beautiful chapter breaks and very well designed things. But we start out. I believe this is somewhere in space. And real quick, let me.
Oh, sorry. One quick question before we get heavy in. So this was originally serialized, and this is a collection of like original floppies, I guess, collected.
Yeah. So I'll be covering volume 1.
Okay. Cool.
Of this, and the links in the description and on irsagency.com are both. You can get either volume 1, or you can look at the collected compendiums, which are kind of larger library editions.
Got it. And have they concluded the series, or is it ongoing?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, those were just my nerdy curiosities on that one. So awesome.
Yeah, it's concluded, and it's we couldn't even begin to scratch the surface of going the whole story arc here. So
yeah, that's a good call, honestly.
Yeah. So we start somewhere that I think is in space. And I'll just read you really quick what I wrote as a description of this, because I'm trying to encapsulate like what it is, and I think it's a good place. But East of West is a weird, twisted sci-fi, high fantasy, apocalyptic Western, where death has broken the ranks with the Four Horsemen, and the world has begun to split into 7 different nations. And so we start here, and we jump in, and we see this series of panels where things start to glow and crackle and spark, and then these creepy 3 children kind of emerge. And then the one says, "This isn't right." What's happening is that these are 3 of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse being reborn. They cast some items, and they read that the eye, the feather, the bullet, and the bone. There's no mistaking that, of what's happening here. And so we're getting into some really deep kind of ethereal magic voodoo type things. And they decide that they're going to have to kill Death because he's not one of them anymore. And so then this is one of those pages that I like, where they'll just stop and they'll give you like this little thought, and it's always related, but a little bit other than the story. And this was actually the pitch that Hickman used to pitch this. The things that divide us are stronger than the things that unite us. And so this is chapter 1, Out of the Wasteland.
I do love already the fact that you brought up the fact that like indie books, and one of the sad things, like this shouldn't be only indie books, but one thing you'll find in what we tend to classify as indie for this channel is the incredible book design used, and the lack of fear of white space and common like design errors that you see in like a lot of mainstream. That just like indies have the freedom for the artists to actually be like, no, this chapter break is going to be one tone, with a lot of error. So I wanted to highlight that. That's a really good point, because this is really nicely designed. Yeah. And
so you see pages like this and like this, which in a mainstream comic would be considered wasted pages. Yeah. But they set the tone, and they give you a pause, and it's really good pacing. So we jump in here, and we see a series of events. And so this is the Civil War that's happening here. And you have this man named Elijah, who is one of the Civil War Greys. And then at one point in time, he receives revelation and turns into the prophet Longstreet. A year later, Standing Bear submits to Red Cloud, and so Red Cloud becomes the chief of chiefs, and that is the beginning of the endless Indian nation. They began fighting a war, and then America began fighting a war on 2 fronts, and it was tearing the world apart. People were kind of aligning and everything, and then a comet strikes. And it says, there are those that say that the comet should have struck some other land, that God, like with Joshua and the Amorites, somehow held the world up, keeping it from spinning so that he could deliver his judgment. Divine intervention or not, this marked the end of all hostilities and the remarking of the territory, and it was then divided up against 7 nations, the 7 nations of America. So this is in the early 1800s, and we're fast forwarding into kind of our time now, though obviously a different timeline. The accords were signed at Armistice, and that Armistice is the epicenter of the comet strike. And then the prophet Longstreet penned the second book of Revelation at the same time as Red Cloud shared a waking vision of his council of elders. Those 2 things have come together, the written word and the spoken word, to become what's called in the story as the message.
Huh.
And then you have the beginnings of different things. And so we see in New Shanghai, which is one of the 7 nations of America, you have the Mao dynasty continuing to kind of do that. And then you have the Indians and the Chinese and the Southern whites and the blacks and different cultures, Northerners and Southerners and different races and different communities of people develop into these nations. And so now we have these 7 nations. And then we fast forward to modern time, and it's modern time because the blacks become black rather than desaturated browns and grays and reds. And so this man walks into a bar, and he brings with him 2 Native American witches, and it's a bar full of futuristic Confederates who are quite racist, and the bartender says, "You're welcome here, sir, but your companions are not." And he says, pardon me if I failed to notice your company, sir, but you'll find yourself today on the edge of civilization. The edge of late is bloody. So it don't matter one bit who's vouching for the unclean. I'm afraid their kind get no service here. And he says, the wolf doesn't drink. He's of a particular sort. And the crow, she would never drink here. So this is the man in white is death. You'll notice that he's an adult because he didn't die, whereas the other 3 horsemen died. The woman is crow, and the white man is wolf, and they are friends, compatriots of death. And so he goes in, and the interesting thing about the framing of what's going on here is you start to see this bar fight happen, and we're seeing it from the perspective of the bartender, and until we kind of flip around. And once we flip around, we're seeing over the shoulder of death, and we just see the bartender's face as death is saying, "Oh, is there that's a mighty look of fear in your face. Is something going on?" Basically, it was a bad idea for the Confederates to mess with the companions of death, because they waste everybody in the bar. Then the bartender has a flashback. He is this one in the middle, in the upper right panel there. The bartender has a flashback of going toe to toe with death here, and this is the first kind of foreshadowing of something that's happened in the past that we'll learn more about. Then it pulls out, and you see the carnage, and you notice that this is the first part of really ethereal kind of weirdness that's going on. The bartender's eye is a character in this story, and occasionally speaks and jumps out of his skull and kind of has conversations with people and whatnot. So anyway, it turns out that the bartender is of an old class of people called trackers or hunters, that they basically have a network of a combination of technology and magic that is able to locate anyone. And he was instrumental in finding Death's location to go and take something from him that we don't know what it is yet. So then the bartender begs for his life. Death is saying, don't you buy an agent, buy his silence. Doesn't your kind have a code? Never give up a contract. And the bartender says, doesn't your kind have some experience with people bargaining for a few more breaths of life? And so he gives up the names of some people that we're not aware who they are yet to save his life. And Death says, you've crossed me once and lived. That's a mercy you won't find again. And there's the thing I love about the writing of this is that Death is much like a kind of a Terry Pratchett novel.
Yeah.
He's a physical entity, but people speak to him and he speaks of himself as an anthropomorphized force.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny you mentioned Terry Pratchett, because I'm like, there's definitely some like Good Omens, like the novel overlap. It seems like in theme, because I mean they both deal with the Horsemen and stuff. So that's an interesting parallel. But I agree. That is interesting. He's not. I like that idea though. Yeah.
And he's it's also kind of funny that he's just kind of like he's kind of just like a John Wayne Western hero character.
Yeah.
And he's written in a way where you can hear a little bit of the twang and you can hear a little bit of the country in him, And another thing that's interesting is that Crow and Wolf are often having conversations like close behind or near Death, where they're trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And you get the impression that Wolf has known Death much longer than Crow has.
Got it.
And so this is also one of my favorite things about Dragotta, is that he has this incredible ability to design the most interesting things. Death's horse, which in the Book of Revelations is a pale horse, in this book is some sort of like large greyhound horse thing that we find out later is a giant cannon, like a huge laser cannon. And then also just we're slowly pulling out of this, and you get little hints up in the upper left-hand corner here where we're looking at some mountains mixed with some tech, and you'll see a lot of like natural elements mixed with industrial elements kind of in the design of certain nations, and each nation has a very distinct visual flavor of architecture and clothing. And everything. I mean, the world building visually is incredible here. It's quite good.
Yeah, it's a great panel too, with that silhouette of the horse up top. That just the composition of these are really nice.
Right, and this is where I say the colorist is really singing. I mean, that's some like Chuck Jones level, kind of red hills there.
Yeah, for sure.
So then we cut over to the Three Horsemen. They are discussing how they hate being children. They hate this part before they transition into adults. And one of them is like, I actually kind of like it because he finds it funny, when the look on people's faces when they get killed by a 6-year-old. And they're cracking. It's like gallows humor all throughout these 2 pages. They find this guy. They ask him to tell a joke. He doesn't know what they're talking about. And so then they say, it's like this, knock, knock. Who's there? The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And then he would say the Four Horsemen who, and then there's some funny bit at the end. Got it? Jokes, like that. So then he says, but there's only 3 of them, and they stomp him to death, and the camera pulls out to reveal kind of this Triforce looking thing that they made out of thousands of bodies that they just killed. Then we cut to the White Tower, where you have the President of the United States of America coming in contact with Death, who he doesn't recognize yet. And the President is kind of coming back and forth. Death is making kind of snide comments about power and how it's funny. And, he says things like, there are no doors I can't walk through anytime I please, and no place I can't reach, and no man I can't meet. That type of thing. And then he recognizes who he is and runs and is murdered. And just the interesting thing about the interesting thing about the drawing is you feel like the hair trigger that it takes from Death to go. He's not subtle. He goes from calm to like just raging, like a murderous rage in a second. And you almost see that, the white character design. He's like a white heat, like kind of like that. And then the typography is always really good.
Yeah, those panels on the right also really remind me of like Lobo.
Yeah.
Like just that vibe of kind of ultra violent, angry dude. It's pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the calm kind of walk away. And again, lots of white space in between things. 12 hours ago, the president was murdered, and the world now awaits word of the new one. Eyes are on the White Tower. We didn't give a warning on this. I probably should have given a warning. I wouldn't say it's as violent as some comics that I've read, like Invincible is much more violent, but where it does get violent, it's pretty gruesome. So there's a warning after the fact. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it seems like definitely a little tamer than the Lady Killer, but it's like, it's definitely like heads toward that ballpark sometimes.
Right. And you'll see that they cut away from stuff.
Yeah.
You don't see, things are implied. There's blood in the panels or blood in the gutters rather than in the panels. So then the three horsemen of the apocalypse show up, and they murder everyone in the succession to become president until they find a true believer who quotes the message to them. And so she's seventh in line, formerly Secretary of the Interior, and she becomes the president. And then there's just gibberish, which later makes sense, but they begin quoting parts of the message. So I think I'm gonna break here and introduce some of the people that we're about to see, because this is a cast of characters that spans 7 different countries, and it's actually a fairly expansive group of people. So you have War, Famine, and Conquest. Those are the three horsemen of the apocalypse. You have Ezra Orion. There's a group of people that we'll meet in a moment called the Chosen, and they're basically one representative of each nation that have committed to bringing about the apocalypse. And Ezra Orion is the premier of Armistice, meaning he's the one that rules over the area where the comet hit. You have Madame President Antonia LaVey, who we just met, who became the president of the United States after the president was killed. John Freeman I is the crown prince of the Kingdom of New Orleans, and his father, John Freeman, his father, King John Freeman, is the king. Chevio, also chosen. He's a shaman who's been an outcast from the Endless Nation. Hugh, I don't know how to pronounce that, is the daughter of Mao V, and the sister to Zaylin, who we'll meet Zaylin in a minute. And then Balloon is a character we won't meet in this volume, but Balloon is one of my favorite characters. It's a sentient AI sphere that floats around and messes with people. Then you have Death, Crow, and Wolf, who we've met. Governor Bell Solomon, who is the governor of the Republic of Texas, is probably one of my favorite characters. If you've ever met or spoken to a really proud Texan, but like subtly proud, but like deeply ingrained, Bell Solomon's dialogue is just phenomenal. He, like, at one point in time is talking to the new president of the United States, and he says, "You might be the leader of the free world, but what you need to understand is that I am Bell Solomon." Like, it's just really, really good. Then we have Mao Zaylin, who is the sister of Hugh, Death's wife, and the daughter of Mao V. And then there's a couple of ancillary characters. So there's some characters. We have some conversation that's kind of going on. You can see that people are traveling to Armistice. The Chosen arrive in Armistice. They have a discussion. They're meeting the new member, who is the president of the United States, who is seventh in line, and the other 6 were killed. And we meet each person. So you have Ezra Orion in this first panel, Hugh, the House of Mao, Chevio, and then you have Andrew Archibald Chamberlain, Chief of Staff at the Black Towers, and he's also just a hilarious character because he's from the Southern Nation.
Yeah, he definitely looks like a Colonel Sanders type character design there too.
And I mean, he's the consummate plantation owning gentleman of the South. At times referred to as a devil with a silver tongue, and he talks his way out of everything, and is constantly playing, both sides of things and things like that. John Freeman of the Free Kingdom of New Orleans, and then Bell Solomon, who introduces himself as "I am Bell Solomon, skeptic, and also governor of the Republic of Texas." They have some interchange. There's some kind of ordeals and seances and whatnot. And Chamberlain kind of takes off. He says, anyway, Hugh says, "Losing your stomach for slaughter, Chamberlain." And he said, "I've had blood on my hands from before you were born, girl. It was just a suggestion before I leave. Take it or leave it, however you like." So he takes off. We go to the Black Towers and we see the interaction. And I love the character designs here of the guards and everything. What you'll see is we meet people in each of these nations that there's old stuff, like the Confederate flag, mixed with futuristic technology. And so we have what a Confederate soldier might look like, 20 years from now, if this were a high fantasy sci-fi dystopian, whatever, right? And so they kind of have all those colors, and even looks a little bit like kind of a wool cloak, and they still have these long rifles and things like that. So he walks in and has a conversation with Death, and this is pretty good dialogue here, in kind of the back and forth is interesting. I know I'm reading a lot more than I typically do, but I love the way that some of this stuff is written. So he says, there are two types of men who feign boldness. We call them gamblers. And then there are they who are truly bold, and we call them valiant. And while I am neither, I understand only one thing, and I speak only one language, and that, son, is leverage. And the chutzpah it takes to call Death son, it's just kind of to his character. And he's always, very calmly doing things and, smoking as he kind of is being threatened and whatever. And you can see through his body language, in the left middle panel here, he's leaning back and stuff. He's not unafraid. He's just very composed. So he somehow convinces Death not to kill him yet. And Death reveals that the hunter has given him the list of names of all but one of the chosen. And so he knows who the people are that betrayed him, and he's going to go kill them one by one. He's already killed the president, who's on that list. He came here to kill Chamberlain. Chamberlain kind of talks him out of it, and anyway, says that. So then we meet Zhao Lin, who is the Lotus of Death, and it's quoted here: of a third, but not of three, a lotus, the death and the resurrection of love, a cup of a cup, a chalice of a chalice, which later starts to make a little bit of sense, but never really makes total sense because it's the message, which is supposed to be this cryptic type thing. She's obviously extremely dangerous the way that she's handled, kind of throughout everything, and just in the shackles that they have and everything. And we cut back to Chamberlain saying, "What you don't know is that your wife is not dead, and I know where she is." And so we realize that Zhao Lin here is the wife of Death.
Hmm.
Who is this woman? The one that conquered death. And so then we get a little history of the.
I like the pacing a lot already because I'm just noticing it's got a very like mythological vibe to it in a lore, like a very storytelling style to it, like telling a tall tale and weaving in kind of like prophecy and mysticism and stuff like into it to kind of just make this really intriguing pacing. I'm already really into that, like that part of it, because I do enjoy those breaks, like, and then they give you like little hints, and I think that makes it so far really fun to like kind of see, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And again, the design of the book, just with those little breaks and everything, just the way it is.
Yeah.
Even the fact that they went gray here instead of black.
Yeah.
It's just everything about it. I just love it. So we start on a lotus, and then we're given kind of a manga Eastern style of storytelling where we just start seeing little vignettes, little scenes, little glimpses of the surroundings before we actually get. It's all it's storytelling, but not in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so then we see this. She's brought before her sister Hugh, who's one of the chosen. And they're scanning her, and you can see again this mix of like ancient and modern. We have kind of the architecture and the the curved rooftops and the paper windows and things, but then they also have like projections that come out of their hands that can scan someone to see if they're concealing any weapons. There's mention of her being modified, and then just more good dialogue like, "She's clean, ma'am. Yes, like a dog's mouth." You can tell that there's no love lost between these sisters here. And so some flashback again to this scene where everybody is circled around. We still don't quite know what's going on, but we're starting to see that these three characters on the right here, those are the three horsemen of the apocalypse as adults. So we're flashing back. We're flashing back to that. So you can see some of that going on. You see a battle that happened, and then you see this line: "She lasted longer than you will." So then we cut in, and we're back at the bar. The newly refurbished Atlas uses it as "Welcome to the Atlas, newly refurbished and exceptionally fine." And then this guy's having a bad week because now he comes in and he's meeting the other three horsemen. So he didn't have a great day when he met the first horseman. He's meeting the other three horsemen, and they are kind of conjuring what has happened in this place in the past, and they see the image of the adult death. You can tell that they're getting a little bit older and a little bit taller. And just one thing that I love about comics is the sound effects. And so this splurt, as the eye pops out of this guy's head and begins to tell its story to the horseman. and Wooten here is just killing it on the lettering as you get these little subtle changes, and you can almost hear the quivering creepiness in the red balloon there. So he begins to kind of spill it, saying that death came, and he came with two witches, and then he gets captured and shoved back in, and before they kill him, he says, "I have something that I can tell you." And he reveals that the trackers, of which he is one, can find anyone through this depository of what they call the Pathfinder, which is a depository of like this metaphysical technique and modern technology. And so he locates Death, and they head out. So now we cut to Death, and Death is wandering ahead of his friends while Wolf and Crow are discussing what's going on, and Crow is trying to figure out what Death's motivations are, And Wolf says, I don't wonder what they are. I know his motivations are love. You come face to face with love, and before the sun sets, you've become someone you didn't used to be. It makes the old new. It makes dead things live. Love makes you into something better. It's the reason a wolf would chase a crow, even knowing he can't fly, and she don't ever need to touch the ground. Love sends a man halfway around the world just for the hope of catching it. So you get an interesting kind of glimpse into all three characters' motivations, even though they're all talking about kind of death. Then we go back to New Shanghai, the Imperial Palace. We've got Premier Mao here. And the two of you, since you were young like animals, at each other's necks and blah, blah, blah. So this is Mao the Fifth. They go through. He's not happy with his daughter, basically because he's saying death is coming. And death is coming, and it's your fault because you courted death. As the wife of death, death is coming for us all. So he has her released. He sends a message. So that messenger kind of takes off, and the message is suing for peace, but he does it really poorly. He's conquered several of the nations, and so he's a little hubris comes into play here. He's a little cocky when it comes to war, and he basically tells death, tell death we will not be the only ones to die here today. Tell him I swear it. And so death, the messenger rides out. Death, Crow, and Wolf are just decimating the armies. The messenger basically says, I have a message for you. Nothing that you've met out here. These are the scraps. These are the people that we throw out, to the wolves, as it were. What we've got inside the wall is beyond anything you guys have ever met. And he mentions Mao's dragons and the Great States Widowmakers, which are two different types of warriors of this thing, and they're raised differently. And you get a little insight into that this entire thing, and everything that Mao says is based on violence, and that's how he's kind of conquered so far. And anyway, death is not he says each child appointed at conception, selected for service, they are born to serve, they are bred to die. And death interrupts and says, good, because that's what happens next, me. And so he says, the Great Wall is coming down and my judgment will follow shortly. So we cut back to the wall in New Shanghai. And Mao's asking his daughter if it was worth it. And she says yes. And then this little aside fits really well. It's almost like a thought that she's having. When I was a child, you taught me to regret was for the weak. How can you expect me to feel such a thing now?
I also want to comment on that color hold technique. I've actually used that technique in Jacob's Apartment, the first graphic novel I made that I still haven't published yet. But whenever there were sequences that were dream sequences or flashback sequences, I would do a color hold on the line. And I think that's a really effective technique that's being used a lot on this. And it's really cool to see it in action. Done way better than when I was doing it. But I do love that. And I think that is taking advantage of one of those great things in the comic book medium, where that's something you can really subtly do in a comic to kind of show a signifier of time passing or a flashback and kind of maintain continuity. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I agree. And it's, the nice thing about the way that they're doing this is that at no point in time does somebody have to say, meanwhile, or 2 years ago, you just know, oh, this is a flashback, right?
Yeah. I mean, and it's subtle indications where it's like, your mind is just like, why doesn't that panel have a line around it? Like, why is the line not black? Oh, okay. It's,
right.
It's not that anyone reading it would take that much time to process that. But what's neat is like, that's what the artist and the colorist worked out so that it just reads like clockwork. It doesn't take a lot of brain power to process,
Yeah. So then I'm going to kind of fast forward through a lot of this. I'm just going to take about maybe 3 or 4 more minutes. So I don't need to tell every panel of the story, and we're not going to cover all 45 issues anyway. So, this this was one of the most satisfying reads that I had, was finally seeing what this horse did. You see in battle, you're wondering, because you see Crow, who can turn into a murder of crows, like a large flock of crows, and you see Wolf, who can turn into a big pack of wolves, and you see Death, who's just blowing people away. But you wonder how they're going to literally take on tens of thousands of soldiers until you see what this horse does.
Yeah.
And it just destroys just a chasm. And it's just incredible. So he rears up, and another great sound effect. You get Thoom there, and then there's just this trench that has been dug out. Frank is saying the 45 issues are for the after party. I wouldn't mind going through more of this in the after party. And so anyway, so there's more battle. You see how Crow she kind of does like a backflip and then starts to turn into a bunch of crows, which I imagine would be very hard to shoot at. Wolf turns into a pack of wolves. And then you see things start to crash and start to fall apart. And I mean, just the color here is incredible. The action here is incredible. And you notice that the line work starts to blur with the motion. And one of my favorite things here is that after this horse is spent, it begins to like drool lava almost. Like it's got this, you can tell it's hot. So anyway, it continues really cool. Good. You see Zalin and Hugh fight. Hugh thinks that because Zalin is unarmed that she'll easily be beaten because she's got a sword, and that turns out to not be the case, because earlier in their childhood, Hugh took her hands and they were replaced and augmented with metal hands now, so she's much stronger. She then kills her father and becomes Mao the Sixth. So Chamberlain there is seeing all that and kind of discussing what's going on. He's visited by the Three Horsemen. So you're starting to get this pattern of they're chasing him. And so you really see where he goes, they're following his trail. And so they start to talk to everybody that he's talking to. And it's interesting to see how each of these characters is either killed or talks their way out of being killed from these two groups of people that have diametrically opposed opinions. And so, if you don't get killed by Death and Wolf and Crow, you also have to figure out how not to get killed by, famine and pestilence and war. So it's just interesting. The aftermath of war, everybody bows down. And this is kind of sets the tone. And I think I'll probably end here, maybe just flip through a bunch of pages, but it's interesting to see Chamberlain here. They're threatening him, and he's the first person that hasn't been scared by them. And he says, I'll just read this whole page because it'll kind of wrap everything up. Well, as long as we're being honest with one another, I cannot help but notice he is on the other side of the world while the three of you are here. Proper roles, as you say. It seems you have become what you appear to be, a bunch of wet-legged children. Might I humbly suggest concerning yourselves with doing your job and worrying less about mine? You dare? Oh, I indeed do. What is there to fear here? You? Boy, I have known war all my life. And conquest? I am a conquistador. Famine? Well, lean times are for the peasants, aren't they? And I do not look like a man whose wants have surpassed his needs. All I fear is one thing, and that is the same thing you do, death. The difference is that I understand him, while you still can't comprehend why the four are now three, and the apocalypse eludes your grasp. For years you have wondered, how did everything go so wrong? Well, the answer is right there on the other side of the world in New Shanghai. She happened, and who is she? She is the rightful heir to the house of Mao. She is a nation. She is Zalin, and you should fear her as much as you fear him, for she is the woman who had conquered death.
Huh.
So just really good writing, good visuals. We now meet this Belle Solomon comes and everything, but everything about this is just incredible. And this is where we have a flashback some spoilery stuff at the end that I'll just kind of skip over, but that's All Men Tell Lies. These are a few of them. So
I love it. Great. So I guess that this would be a really good time to do our audit.
yes.
So let me switch it. I believe this will get us there. So it's time to balance the books. The Indie Review Show is brought to you by Audible, and you can now get a free audiobook and support the show by going to audibletrial.com/IRS. And this week, I am recommending The Sandman by Neil Gaiman. And I would say the audiobook version of this has a full cast. It's incredible. If you guys are unfamiliar with The Sandman, at some point on this show, I'm sure we'll be covering multiple books by Neil Gaiman. He's probably one of the most prominent, prolific, influential authors in comics in the last like 5 decades, and it's good stuff. It's mystical, it's mythical. I think it ties in really well with the book that Cory brought as well, because it's sort of this mythological story of this family of the dreaming and of the Sandman, who's the main character, the brother of Death, who is personified and actually a woman who is really in love with life as a character. And it's just got these great, wonderful horror and fantasy. It takes steps with horror and fantasy and interwoven mythology in a way that only Neil Gaiman can. So when he goes horror, it'll be like the most horrific thing you've ever read. When he goes mystical, it'll be one of the most mystical. When he goes romantic, it'll be one of the most romantic. So anyhow, I highly recommend it. And I was really skeptical. I'll just say on the last part, I was really skeptical about how it would translate as an audiobook, and was really pleasantly surprised by how well they pulled off this book. And the cool thing is, if you use that code, the audibletrial.com/IRS, I believe you can get this book for free on Audible, so with a trial. So yeah, that's my recommendation. And then we'll just go back to the thing. Oh yeah, I was also going to say, if you like this book or any books we're recommending, go to irsagency.com, and it's easy to support the show by just clicking on one of the links. So when we recommend you go to irsagency.com, if you buy anything on Amazon, like you're going to buy a book, if you go through the irsagency.com link, it gives us a kickback, and it doesn't raise the price for you. So it's a good way to support the show and help us keep making the time and effort to kind of review and talk about these things. So yeah.
Absolutely. There's a lot of discussion in the chats about the after party, which seems to be way more popular than the actual show.
That is true. Well, it is a party.
Yeah. The after party is a new thing that we're kind of experimenting with. And so it does happen on Josh's channel or my channel. We'll kind of just announce it at the end which one we're doing.
Mm-hmm. And I'd imagine, since usually we do the person whose channel is the person who reviewed the book, so it likely will be on Cory's channel this week.
Yeah.
Just nice.
So Josh, have I convinced you?
I am intrigued. I have to say, it sounds like a lot of fun, and I do like. I think the thing that really stands out about it, that kind of differentiates it from quite a lot of work in that genre, and I'm glad you mentioned it at the top, is definitely the character design. Like the character design, like that horse, and the different characters just really make me interested on a visual level. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, like, the plot got me intrigued, and I do want to know what happens next. So it definitely seems like a fun, action heavy, sort of thriller-ish thing, because there is like this whole air of mystery that it seems like they're kind of weaving throughout. And how could you not want to read that? It's just fun. And like, I do enjoy the dialogue, and I also always I'm a sucker for a dystopian story that takes a what if kind of approach to history. where it's like, hey, what if like at this time in history, this different historical thing happened, and then the whole planet broke into these different factions or something like that. Right. So I do love that, and I liked that on an art level too, like the mixing of different genres where they're pulling different cultures and stuff and kind of mixing it with tech. It's just overall a lot of fun. So I definitely am interested, and it also just it seems like a fun action, story, but also kind of mixed with a Western and its own kind of unique thing. Plus, the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse are just such great fodder for a future story that it's always fun to read a take on it. And this definitely seems like a unique take on that. So yeah, I'm definitely interested.
Yeah, it's great. Let's read this. As somebody who's been watching for more of these lately, I'm enjoying Josh's camera monitor arrangement that makes it appear as if he's looking at Cory. So if I look over here,
nice.
So yeah, I love this, and I only hesitate to recommend it because there's a little bit of violence, there's some swearing, and the occasional bit of nudity, but not gratuitous. I don't feel like. But yeah, it's one of my favorite books. I mean, the colors are incredible and really set the mood as they go. I think one of the biggest things, the biggest takeaways for me is, I love things that are historical and well researched, but not bound to that history. So like in my own work, when I'm doing something, I don't want people to say, like, well, that that model of typewriter wasn't around in that year. I want it to be obvious that like there's some similarities to what's going on, but it's an alternate reality or an alternate timeline or alternate history. And I love that we can see like, there was an American Civil War, there's Confederates, there's different things. And we have, we have Mao and we have Native Americans and we have like a lot of these things, but then it's so obviously, that mixed with sci-fi and high fantasy, that it doesn't, nobody's gonna go in and say, and we haven't even met the Endless Nation yet, who the character designs for the Endless Nation. I'll see if I can pull that up. The character designs for the Endless Nation are phenomenal because what they've done is they've mixed Native American with high tech, and so nice. they have become cyborgs in that they've implanted things in themselves, and yet it still feels very authentic. And so there a lot of that kind of coded visual, but then again, that thing that I love is it's twisted just a little bit.
Yeah, and I actually I got a little worried about, we're gonna have to get into that like McKay style discussion for a second, when I saw like Native Americans in it, because that always like borders possible just like inappropriate cultural appropriation. But I feel personally like, and of course I'm speaking as like we have to kind of preface every time we do this, but it's like, look, I'm a gender normative like male, right. Like, so it's like I'm not like necessarily like the demographic, like a demographic that might be offended by it, but the point being like I personally feel like as somebody who tries to be conscious of that kind of thing, because of what you're describing, it kind of gets away from that being something that could be leveled at it, because it's influenced, but it's not like, it's clearly not trying to be like accurate to the representations of like these different cultures. It's pulling different things in a way that is not, I think, demeaning to those cultures. And I actually really appreciated that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would agree, and I don't know if I have the right to agree, but I would agree as well.
Yeah.
To me, and also, it's also like one of those comedians that goes after everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the thing. Nobody seemed targeted or like depicted as less than, which right. I think is really good. So.
Yeah. And so, and then so in volume 2 you start getting into really creepy looking like creatures and stuff.
Oh, I love it.
Anyway, but yeah, so it continues to get better and better and better throughout the series, I feel like, and it's so good. And we haven't even met like some of the main characters yet, because they come in, and that's there is some criticisms of this book, and I disagree with them heavily, but the criticisms are that like it's like intentionally like black box, where it's like they're being intentionally vague, and they're obfuscating, to try to like make it seem deeper than it is. But to me it doesn't read like that. To me it reads very very clean, and I don't actually want a situation where somebody just spells it out, and
Yeah.
like, the narrator steps aside and says, okay, now let me tell you the history of this people and blah 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 blah. And like I would rather get hints and tidbits that allow my imagination to run.
Yeah, I mean, I do think like the comparison to Sandman was pretty appropriate, in the sense of like Neil Gaiman does that too throughout the entire series of the Sandman, where it's like woven with a lot of mystery. There's some through threads that are not necessarily answered, but what's great is like when it starts coming to conclusions of stories, it still ties off the threads but leaves a little bit of the mystery. And I think that's actually like a skill to do that and not end up like the ending of Lost,
Right.
So I'm excited. I have to say I also am a sucker for that style of writing, because the little like I love the hints. Like that was probably the thing that got me most interested in this book when you were going through it, was those little chapter breaks with like, oh, here's a little piece of the message or whatever it's called. It's like that to me is like, okay, see, now I want to know what the message is. Like it is effective. It's really good. And I also like instantly, like that's just such a great place to conclude the review too, because I'm like, I want to pick it up just to know like, okay, how did she court death? Like instantly it's very good at that structure. And I think that like, there's nothing like, people would be overly critical to just critique that element of storytelling, where it's like, just because you want to turn the page doesn't make it bad.
Yeah. I would agree. I want to show just this one character design, because we didn't get to it real quick, and then we'll kind of wrap. But this is the first shot that you get of the leaders of the Endless Nation.
Oh, sweet.
They're so rad. And they have their personal computers, or what we might consider their phones, are these spheres, these orbs that follow them around and communicate with their headsets. And anyway, it's just so good. There's so much of it that's so good.
I love it.
But yeah, so that's my recommendation for the week. And if you are looking for a story that concludes, but also that you can dive into and take a while to get through because it's quite long, this is a good one. But it's not one of those comics that goes on forever and never ends. When people die, they're dead. It doesn't have a lot of the superhero tropes of like mainstream comics. So there are stakes. The one failing is it's super interesting, and I love it. It is a little bit hard to care about any of the characters because they're kind of all despicable. So it's a little bit difficult to like. It doesn't have stakes in the way where you're like, well, I hope that they don't kill so and so or whatever, except for the Beast of the Apocalypse. Is this little kid who is the son of Death and Zelen, and he's pretty cute. And his friend Balloon is the floating AI.
Yeah, it strikes me as like Western in that style, though, in the storytelling. Which a lot of Westerns are like that, where it's like you don't really get a ton of backstory or reason to care about the characters other than this guy is not someone to mess with. Like I wonder what's going to happen when that showdown happens. I mean, so it sounds almost like, in a weird way, it sounds very like premise wise, like it's got some similarities to like, you know, a good old Tarantino flick, like Hateful Eight or something.
Sure.
You know, so
Yeah.
I think that's pretty rad. It sounds pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I'm into it. Okay, so real quick, because I feel like we didn't really brush on this. What would you kind of, how has this work inspired you, or what from it do you think you could like apply to your own work?
So one of the few pieces of fan art I've done is Crow. I did, it was fascinating to me to have, you know, a physical being that was also like almost a metaphor. And she was able to, I mean, just able to the way that they have her turning into a murder of crows is you start to see them kind of breaking apart. And so, for me, this affected my art in the way that, Death is white and Crow is black. And what that allows them to do is it allows them to actually, transform those characters into things without it seeming weird. Like at no point in time reading this do you like start to wonder about Crow's anatomy, you know? At no point do you like, how does that happen? How does Superman fly? You know, you're just, the character design lended itself to the magic of the world. So I would say the biggest thing that stood out to me, would be that the character design allowed things in the story to happen without it taking you out of the story. Whereas if it were a different style, if it were done not as nuanced, I feel like as soon as Wolf turned into a pack of wolves, you'd be like, what? But like in this, you're just like, yep, that makes total sense. You know, like it just felt right. And then the other thing that has really impacted me was, the first comic that I did, which you have read, and you're one of the few people on earth that's read it because I have tried to destroy every copy of it that's available publicly, was just a poor, horrible vomit of exposition. I mean, there were characters that solely existed to spew walls of text that are trying to explain this incredible world that I built. And after reading this, I realized like, oh, you don't have to do that. You can know all of those things and then just occasionally pull an Obi-Wan and say, well, back in the Clone Wars. And then everyone for 50 years is like, or 20 years is like, what are the Clone Wars? Like, it's just an interesting bit that you kind of like, just like in a normal conversation, you and I have a history, or friends have histories. Every time we reference something, we don't say, remember in 1984 when you and I did blah, 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 and tell the entire thing. You just mention it. And
like if you were to say like, I bought a new Wacom tablet today, I would rarely be like, what? Tell me about Wacom. When were they founded? How was a Wacom developed? How does this new technology work? It's like, no, you just kind of talk about it because it exists in this world. I totally agree with that. That's like the Star Wars lesson, I think. Like one of the things that made Star Wars so compelling and believable to people was like, the ship breaks down. They don't have to explain it. It just acts like a car when it breaks down. And everybody's been in a position where they're driving a car when it breaks down. They don't need to be like, oh, the flux capacitor or whatever. It's like, no, it just kind of works, you know?
Yeah. So, how about you? Did you see anything that you would, that would inspire your future work?
If I chose to do, high fantasy or something outside of like the next book I've got on my dock is like a historical fiction thing. And then of course, you know, the book 2, which is autobio, but I do have a part of me that really loves like a well-woven, rich tapestry of a story that's dystopian. And so, definitely on a story level, I picked up a few things. I really love the pacing. I love the design. But I particularly like, I enjoy the way that like, if you are going to build a world like that, to do character designs that are pulling from history, but in ways that are unexpected, which I think everyone could learn from. I can also say, I see with your interest in tech and kind of a similar process of like, when you build a tech thing for like an animation, you're often pulling from things that exist and sort of reconfiguring them into something that feels familiar, but it's not like instantly recognizable. And I can definitely see that in your work a lot. So like, to me, this doesn't surprise me as like an influence or a favorite comic, because it's like, this is like a Cory Kerr type story. It's like, it's in that wheelhouse of stuff you love. So it kind of makes perfect sense. Yeah. But I really like the pacing though. And I agree with you on the story too. I like that it's not building it up. That's one of the things I like about Neil Gaiman as well. It's like, when you're introduced to these mythological characters, it's just like, this is this character. And you're just like, you accept it. It's kind of amazing. And I think it's a hard lesson to learn, because I too struggled with overly heavy exposition in my first graphic novel as well. So, yeah.
I think everybody does. But I mean, Hickman here, Neil Gaiman, and Terry Pratchett, they all have, to say that they don't have exposition isn't true. They all have exposition, but for example, James Jarvis is mentioning, that they're very transparent about the character's plot and direction, which I would agree with, but it's delayed. And so it feels gratifying because like, we don't even get why Death is doing anything until you're like 6 issues in, and so they're very transparent. I mean, at one point in time, and I read this, and it was beautiful writing, but it was definitely exposition. Wolf just fully lays out, like, here's why Death is doing something. He was in love, and this is what happens when you're in love. Also, I love you. Like that's in essence what those 3 pages were. They were expertly crafted, but definitely exposition.
Yeah.
That was 70% of the way through, the first trade paperback collected, so, and that's kind of what I mean is when I did it poorly, it was like, page 1, walls of text. Here's what's going on in this world. Here's everything you need to know. Whereas I feel like you do need those breadcrumbs.
Agreed.
You don't need a pile of them at the beginning of the trail.
Well, and
throughout. And
you particularly need it if you have a story where you aren't giving people a ton of reason to be invested in the character. So if you're going to do a story that's like plot points that are going to keep people hooked, like you definitely need to breadcrumb that throughout to give people a reason. Because like, once again, if you're not like personally invested in like, oh man, I hope this character doesn't die. Like that's an easy investment, but like the plot thread thing is smart too, where you get a cookie crumb and you're like, what's the message? Like who courted death? Like, like, why is this conflict happening? Like, like different things that I think that realm of mystery, it also just has the fun of a murder mystery where it's like, that's half the hook of a murder mystery is, unless it's Columbo, you're pacing around waiting to see like, who did this? I wonder if I can figure it out first. So I think that's great. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. We're going to have the after party on my channel.
Oh,
and so
one last trailer. Next week, one of the best graphic novels ever made, we'll be reviewing, and it's a horror comic. It's fun. It's goofy. I want to put it in color because like that band is in red, but whatever. You guys can wait till next week. But it's by Charles Burns, who is probably one of the most recognizable illustrators in indie comics. And they spent about 15 years on this book, but it's literally just a high school horror story where what if like a mass plague hit a high school written by a guy who hated high school? It's amazing. So we'll get into it, but it should be fun. And it's actually like the first book I've had to go. I'm not super nervous about going through because it's mostly visual and it's mostly horror. And the plot is just kind of, the art is wonderful. So I think it'll be a good introduction, but yeah, stay with us for next week's as well. So having never read it, I can tell you that cover is so iconic that I know I've seen it everywhere hundreds of times. Yes.
It sticks with you. So I'm really excited to kind of see
it. And I will also say like part of why this cover is good is Charles Burns. The other part is the secret behind half of the good book covers out there. This is a Chip Kidd design. So
that makes sense. That makes sense.
Any like 9 times out of 10, if it's a good book cover, it's Chip Kidd.
If it stands out to you on the shelf, it's Chip Kidd. Great. So if you want to buy this book, or any other books that we've done. And if you haven't seen our other episodes, go back and watch them. They're all here. All of those things can be found at irsagency.com. It has nothing to do with the Internal Revenue Service and has everything to do with the Indie Review Show. And so you can go to the irsagency.com and we will have past episodes there, as well as what we're doing in the future, as well as links to each one of those things. And if you buy anything through those links, it gives us a little kickback so that we can keep the lights on, but then it doesn't actually cost you anything more. And if you don't want to do that because you don't like supporting Amazon, which I can totally understand, but you still want to support this show, we have a Patreon, which is also at irsagency.com. And if you're not down with Patreon, but you love audiobooks, then you can get the audiobook there, any audiobook you want. And if you sign up with a free trial, then they give us a little kickback as well. So lots of different ways to support the show. And Kayla here is saying she said she didn't know why. She didn't know what was going on. It's because she forgot to hit the bell. So if you're watching this now, hit the bell. And now I think they've made the bell more complicated because you not only have to hit the bell, but then you have to like choose a drop-down menu or whatever. This channel that we're on right now only goes live Monday nights. So it's not like you're going to get spammed with a million different things. It's just once a week, 9 p.m. California time on Mondays.
I love it.
And if you want to see Josh's stuff, you can go to joshuakemble.com. If you want to see my stuff, you can go to CoryKerr.com. And we're going to head over to the after party, which is going to start in about 5 minutes. So hopefully you guys come with us.
On Cory's channel. Cory's channel.
My channel.
Cory's channel. Cory Kerr, YouTube. Boom.